The Pullman strike was a bitter conflict between the workers and management, who fought for better wages and living expenses. Impeding the use of Pullman train cars halted efficiency of transport, resulting in opposition towards strikers. The strike lasted months with little compromise until the government stepped in to end it. Although the Pullman strike was only successful in that it inspired the making of Labor Day, it did not assist in the immediate establishment of stronger labor unions or allowing for laborers to attain better working rights.
After the Civil War and the Reconstruction era, the United States experienced tremendous growth through the spur of industrialization and urbanization. Due to the advances in technology and transportation in the late 1800s, agricultural and manufacturing production greatly increased. Streams of migrants from rural towns came to growing cities, many of the workers women and children. Immigration to the United States reached a high from 1880 to 1920. Unskilled and illiterate, eager workers from Southern and Eastern Europe came by the millions. This wave of new immigrants resided in unplanned areas of the city, often in cramped tenement housing. Child mortality rates were notoriously high due to poor sanitation, plumbing, and disease. When George Pullman founded the Pullman Palace Car Company, he had hoped to create a perfect town in which his workers could live and work under his supervision.
Born March 3, 1831 in Brockton, New York, George Mortimer Pullman was the third child of James Lewis Pullman and Emily Carolyn Pullman. James Pullman was formerly a farmer, but switched to the more popular and lucrative craft of carpentry. In 1845, the Pullman family moved to Albion, New York to work as carpenters during the building of the Erie Canal. In 1853, George Pullman became a general contractor to help move the buildings along the canal. After the project was completed, he moved to Chicago and got a job raising buildings into more stable foundations. When he realized that raising buildings was a dying occupation, he decided to go into the sleeping car business. Pullman got the idea to create his own luxury rail car after having a tiresome and uncomfortable train journey. The first model, called the Pioneer, would attract great attention after it was used to transport Abraham Lincoln's body across America. Pullman would soon become an industrialized businessman who monopolized the sleeping car industry for economic benefit.
The Pullman Company was officially founded on February 22, 1867. In the early 1880s, Pullman purchased more than 4,000 acres of prairie land 12 miles south of the business district of Chicago, on the western shore of Lake Calumet. This site, though purchased by his company for $800,000, is estimated to be worth $5 million today. The town started running in 1880, and thousands of workers were soon employed. The Pullman car shops were in operation in 1881. By May, there were more than 350 permanent residents. The town was officially completed in 1884 with paved roads, resident buildings, local stores, movie theaters, and parks. George Pullman sought to create a model town by hiring his own workers, cutting down on expenses.
George Pullman not only used vertical integration to expand his railroad company, but he also set up a noble experiment that would stand as a national model of efficiency and order. What Pullman built was called a company town, a place where all stores and housing are owned by one company. Paternalism was at the root of all the processes orchestrated by George Pullman. He believed that his model town was a true depiction of a utopia. However, constant control and surveillance by Pullman officials soon became an annoyance for the inhabitants of his company town. From the absence of democracy and governance to the many restrictions on everyday life, employees soon felt restrained and controlled. One of the major causes of dissatisfaction was the inability of the workers to own property in Pullman. Workers lived in houses owned by the company, much like everything else in the town. The company, though aware of the discontent, never really addressed the issue, fearing that the experiment would be affected. The overpowering control would soon prove controversial as it caused conflict between business owner and laborer.
The Panic of 1893 was an economic crisis caused by the collapse of two of the country's largest businesses, the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad and the National Coach Company. After borrowing significant sums from banks, hundreds of businesses went bankrupt as they were unable to pay off debts later on. Around the time of the Depression was a Columbian Exposition, held in 1893 in the city of Chicago. It was a 400-year celebration of Columbus sailing to America, along with the progress of civilization, such as new industrial technologies from all over the world. The business from the fair postponed the effects of the economic depression in Chicago.
When the Columbian Exposition ended, the Pullman Company started to suffer from the lack of business. To make up for this loss, George Pullman cut the wages of the workers as much as 25%. George did not reduce the rent and other charges in the company town, which caused many families to face starvation. John Peter Outgett, the governor of Illinois, strongly supported the workers and said, "They state that 1,600 families, including women and children, are starving, that they cannot work and have no means to go elsewhere, that your company has brought men from all over the United States to fill their places." The Gilded Age was a time for reform, and for those who worked in the industrial sector, organized labor unions was a way to fight for better wages, reasonable hours, and safer working conditions. The labor movement led efforts to stop child labor, give health benefits, and provide aid to workers who were injured or retired.
The Knights of Labor, organized back in 1869, was a union similar to the American Railway Union. They advocated for an 8-hour workday previously pushed by the National Labor Union. In the May of 1886, a series of violent strikes broke out in the Haymarket area of Chicago, Illinois, between striking laborers and strikebreakers. The violence killed both strikers and policemen. Soon after the riot, the union quickly declined due to poor management, but mostly because of skepticism that arose from the public. The advocates were now considered anarchists who would wreak havoc upon the American economic system. The American Railway Union was an industrial union, or one that represented members of an entire industry, rather than a craft or job skill. The union was dedicated to uniting all railroad workers and served as a model for future unions.
A few members of the American Railway Union went to ask Pullman to lower the rent when they were soon fired. Workers thought this was a consequence of speaking up, but it was later proven to be a coincidence. This sparked fear in the workers as they knew that Pullman could easily replace them because of the high unemployment in America. Nevertheless, they chose to strike on May 11, 1894. The strike remained mostly peaceful because Deb strongly emphasized that if they were to result to violence, the blame would soon turn to the strikers. But after several weeks, the Pullman management had not changed its position and the strikers became desperate. The American Railway Union offered to send arbitrators for the Pullman cause. Although the strikers refused help, the American Railway Union decided that they would stop handling the Pullman cars anyway, which set off a nationwide railroad strike.
As a result of impeding railway traffic, President Grover Cleveland sent out federal troops to the site of the strike. A federal injunction was issued, and union leaders such as Eugene V. Debs were arrested for interfering with the deliverance of mail. The federal courts soon used the Sherman Antitrust Act against labor unions. The Antitrust Act was created to control larger businesses and any trusts that they formed. The court decided that the American Railroad Union was an illegal trust and issued an order to halt the strike. For that reason, any worker who continued to strike under the union could now be considered a criminal under the law. Once the Pullman Company opened back up again, any strike leader or member who refused to leave their union membership were fired or blacklisted. This only gave more power to the big businesses, as they could now choose to ignore unions and deny the workers' requests for better working conditions. The American Railroad Union did not survive long after defeat in the strike, as they had received multiple blows to their organization.
The Pullman strike devastated not only the railroads, but the state of Pullman's company. The railroads sustained major property damage at the hands of angry mobs, but also suffered significantly reduced earnings. The strike was responsible for the loss of jobs, fortified wages, and overall agitation from the strikers. Based on the recording of the United States Strike Commission, the total loss sustained by the railroads in Chicago was approximated at $5,360,000. The strikers at Pullman lost $350,000 in wages, and the American Railway Union did not assemble funds for the workers after the strike. The strikers fought courageously for their cause, understanding the dire consequences if they lost the fight. Hungry and impoverished, many Pullman strikers were denied work wherever they went. The American Railway Union was soon disbanded, leaving the workers no refuge.
Through the span of 3 months, the workers of Pullman fought against the company for higher wages and reduced living expenses. The strike devastated the railroads and put the strikers in a large debt. With no way of getting employed, and the American Railway Union dissolved, the workers suffered through the consequences of revolting. Although the Pullman strike was only successful in that it inspired the making of Labor Day. With the American Railway Union disbanded, the workers failed to escape the autocratic system of the Pullman Palace Car Company.